Welcome back to another episode with Fight Pass with Mitch, presented by Notorious Pulls Radio. And for this week's episode, we're going to be going over UFC Fight Night, Marvin Vettori versus Janet Cannonier. And before we get into this one, make sure you leave a like, follow, and subscribe us on all social media platforms. So let's get into it. June 17th, Saturday, Marvin Vettori versus Janet Cannonier. Vettori, the number 3rd ranked UFC middleweight, is going against Jared Cannonier, the number 4th ranked UFC middleweight. A very interesting about this main event is that both fighters are very dominant in the middleweight division and essentially have lost to both Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker. In a sense, everyone else in the division that they've been tested against, they have succeeded, and with violent fashion. But other than to the both kryptonite that they have suffered is to the current UFC middleweight champion Israel Adesanya, where Marvin Vettori lost 2 times, and Jared Cannonier lost to Israel Adesanya. As you know, Marvin Vettori is coming over a win against Roman Dolidze, which was very controversial. The way I saw the fight, I feel like that fight could have gone any way and could have easily been a win for Roman. But as you know, the judges chose Marvin for that fight. And the fight prior to that, he obviously lost to Robert Whittaker. He had a great win against Paulo Costa, and he obviously lost. This was the second time he's lost to Israel Adesanya. I wouldn't write Marvin Vettori off for ever fighting for the title again, but I do believe that between Vettori and Jared Cannonier, I don't think that they will be UFC champions anytime soon. But nonetheless, the division must go on, and we have to decide who's the bigger king between these 2 UFC fighters. I like Janet Cannonier because obviously he was a former heavyweight. He was a former light heavyweight before coming down to middleweight. He's in the best shape of his life, fighting at 185. That's where I believe he exhibits his best talents and his best form of martial arts. Vettori is a very natural 185er. I think he can easily move up to 205 and still do very well, but he's comfortable making weight, and he is, without a doubt, a top 5 guy. I mean, you can't say anything against him. He can strike, he can wrestle. It's just the elite guys, the top 2, 3 guys, they always find his number, and that's what essentially keeps him away from the belt. Cannonier obviously put on a nice boxing clinic. I do think he'll struggle a little bit against Vettori because his wrestling is not as complete. He focuses a lot on striking, and that's where his bread and butter is at. I believe Vettori will make this a 5-round gritty fight and essentially put a better display of talent against Jared Cannonier. The co-main event is also an exciting fight. I do believe Arman Tsarukyan should be fighting somebody ranked going forward. I don't know why the UFC scheduled him against Joaquin Silva, who is a reputable UFC fighter, but I believe Arman is much more talented, and maybe nobody actually wanted to fight him, and as a fighter you want to stay active, so I respect him for, even putting his ranking on the line. A lot of fighters wouldn't do that, fight somebody very, very highly unranked, and he's obviously in the top 10, which is a big difference, and it's obviously a big risk for him. I do still believe he is such a dominant fighter. This should be easy work for Tsarukyan. He's coming off a fabulous win over Damir Ismagulov, who obviously is retired, was also a very high-rising lightweight contender. He had a tough decision loss to Matizias Gamrot, who was also a very talented lightweight, had a great win against Joel Alvarez, Christiagos Giagos. He had a win over Matt Fervola and Davy Ramos. His opponent, Joaquin Silva, 12-3. His last fight was a win against Jesse Ronson. He suffered 2 losses prior, and I guess His other most notable win was against Jared Gordon. So don't want to write him off. He's fought, good competition, but I believe that Tsarukyan is, light years above him. And I believe that will be easy work for Tsarukyan, his wrestling, his striking. I think he's only getting better. He's only developing. And he will definitely be fighting for the title in the coming future as long as, he puts up a nice, good streak going forward. And this is obviously a must-win fight for him. Another interesting thing, the next fight I'm going to introduce is another good Armenian fighter. So it's really cool. On this card, we have two good Armenian fighters that are on this main event. And the name is Armen Petrosyan, and he's going against the undefeated Christian Leroy Duncan. This is a very interesting fight. Petrosyan, as you know, had a great Dana White Contender Series debut, which earned him a contract. He then had his first fight was against a very game opponent, and that's in Gregory Rodriguez. He then, after that, had a really tough opponent who's been absolutely excelling, and he had a loss to Chao Barallo. But he actually took that fight to decision. Barallo's a huge finisher, and that says a lot that he wasn't able to put Petrosyan away, and that fight actually went the distance. And Petrosyan, last fight, he had a win over against A.J. Dobson. His opponent in this middleweight matchup in Leroy Duncan is a big finisher. He had his UFC debut against Dusko Todorovic. Unfortunately, Dusko mid-fight pulled his knee, had a gruesome, doctor stoppage injury, and we couldn't see the full talents of Christian. This will be a good fight. These guys are both lanky strikers. Obviously, Duncan, from everything I've read and watched about him, he is a huge finisher. He has 6 finishes, 1 submission, and he's undefeated, and 1 fight that he won by decision. So he's definitely game. He's really hungry to put on his talents for the UFC, and I'm really excited for this fight. These two guys are really, really up and coming, and you have to keep an eye out for them. But I'm going to rock with Christian. I have a feeling he's going to have a big, big night. It's going to be a breakout night for him versus Petrosyan. So definitely keep an eye out. The next match that I want to discuss is a featherweight matchup against Pat Sabatini and Lucas Almeida. Obviously, Pat Sabatini, 17-4, is coming off a loss to Damon Jackson, where he lost by TKO. He was on a couple fight win streak prior to that and has been doing very well in obviously the regional scene in Northeast area. His opponent, Lucas Almeida, obviously lost his Dana White Contender Series debut, has been on a 2-fight win streak, and has pulled over a really nice win over Mike Trizano. Unfortunately, the UFC has tried to make him multiple bouts. Things have not been able to come to fruition for him, but finally they set him up with a really, really good opponent, and that is Pat Sabatini. Almeida has a really great record, 14-1. He is a very technical featherweight, and I am really excited for this matchup. This matchup is kind of the comeback fight for Sabatini. He was on a big, big hot streak, and now he kind of has to protect his ranking because he's essentially hovering around the top 15 in the featherweight division. So these guys are both seeking to advance their rankings and essentially, obviously, fight in the top 15, which is everyone's goal, of course. The way I see this fight, I really, really like the striking ability of Almeida. I think he has the slight edge over Pat Sabatini in this matchup, and I'm really looking forward to watching these guys fight on Saturday night. Another memorable fight that I'm going to mention is the main event of the prelims, and that's against Nicholas Dalby versus Muslim Salikov. Nicholas Dalby is obviously a UFC veteran. He's on a 2-fight win streak. He obviously has great wins over Wally Alves, Claudio Silva, Daniel Rodriguez. His opponent, Muslim Salikov, is a crazy karate master, very crafty fighter, and has had a really good win against his last opponent, and that was Andre Fiallo. Had a loss to the Asian guy, Li Jingaling, and beat a very great UFC veteran, and that's in Francisco Trinaldo. I like both fighters, but I'm a really big Salico fan. I like the karate style that he brings. He has very interesting striking stance, and always looks to finish the fight, and he has a very nice stand-up overall game in martial arts. So I'm going to be rocking with Salico of this fight. Guys, you tell me who you think is going to win the matchups, the main event, and how the UFC is going to play out their next events. As you know, they made a big announcement. Every Saturday for the next 4 months, we are going to have a UFC event. So you guys are going to be seeing content weekly, daily. Guys, stay tuned. This is your host, Fight Pass with Mitch. We'll see you soon.